Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. It's the Easter week here in the UK, and it's also Semana Santa in Spain, a really beautiful religious festival, all around, obviously, the sad story of Jesus, being crucified on the cross, however, ending on the Easter Sunday with his resurrections. And that gave us a great idea to do for a podcast. Could we do a podcast, Paul, on the top 5 La Liga Resurrections?
Well, yeah. Do you know what the creative juices were flowing, weren't they, the other day as we were speaking through the internal comms of WhatsApp, and I think we started off with our favorite Jesus. Let's do a podcast on a list of players called Jesus, or then it was what about best crosses of Jesus Navas's career. So I think we finally landed on career resurrections. Now, I will apologise if any of those puns are in any way deemed blasphemous, but we mean it all as, a bit of fun and good humour, as always.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, it's a very serious time, and I know it's a very beautiful festival that they're doing it. And if you have never been to Semana Santa in Spain, it's definitely worth experiencing, even if you're not that religious, because it's incredible to see the dedication of the people, the floats that go around the cities. I'm going to Seville this weekend, and by chance I'm there on Easter Sunday, so I know it's going to be A, rammed, and B, I'll get to see one of the biggest Semana Santas in Spain. But we are a football nostalgia podcast, first and foremost, and we did think this would be quite a cool angle because, again, it gives us a chance to think about some players who you don't often probably think about too much. And when you do think about them, it's possibly from maybe, dare I say, Paul, a UK mindset, more of a negative way of thinking rather than celebrating their actual overall careers and basically how they brought themselves back from the brink.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the perfect arc for it. Why we've chosen this resurrection angle, because we do feel these are. I mean, there's definitely some in here that overall, admirers of Spanish football will immediately say, "Oh, what a brilliant player!" And we've got the benefit of hindsight with a lot of these cases, but also because we're keen enthusiasts of football in Spain, we already know the quality they have. But it's always worth revisiting the arc that their careers went on, and the turnaround in some cases is biblical.
It is really good use of the word biblical there, Paul. I really appreciate that. We're really sticking to this one, aren't we? Which is quite good.
Bit of Mancunian slang as well,
Oh, absolutely. Which I suppose when we start with the first player we're going to talk about, maybe him being a Red Devil to begin with, maybe isn't the greatest start for this Resurrections podcast. However, we are talking about Diego Forlan, who, many of us will remember, if you're of a certain age, we're in our mid-30s, aren't we, Paul? And I remember Sir Alex Ferguson signing Diego Forlan from, I think it was Club Atlético Independiente back in South America. And he came in with, a lot of pomp. He came in with a lot of character, and he was, regarded that he was going to be this new strike partner for the likes of Ruud van Nistelrooy and co. And essentially, I suppose to top the whole story off of his time in Manchester United, Paul, he was a bit of a laughing stock in Manchester, wasn't he?
Yes. Let's say he didn't live up to expectations. Viewed as a bit of a disappointment, I think is probably one way to put it. I mean, from the side of Manchester I'm speaking, was no issue for me. But certainly for Manchester United fans, he was a disappointment, and there was a weight of expectation. I mean, this is the era of probably you could say peak Fergie. You know, United are in that late 90s, early 2000s period where they were kind of untouchable. I'm just saying this through gritted teeth, you know. They'd obviously done the treble and they were serial winners. They were a club that seemed to be able to buy anyone they wanted, and kind of anybody who they chose to bring in was automatically considered they must be the next big thing, or they must be, you know, a quality player, because Manchester United wouldn't sign him if they weren't. So there was expectation that came with that, and I think he was about 25, wasn't he, when he ended up leaving United in 2004? I want to say 2004. Yeah. And it was kind of like, yeah, there was a lot of feeling in Manchester, or from the Red side, that yeah, he hadn't lived up to expectations. But then a new dawn in Spain.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, he left Manchester United with that cloud of, oh, he's just another one of these South American boys who can score a lot of goals in Argentina or Brazil, but he can't actually do it in the big leagues in Europe. And, you
Yeah,
know,
can't
it
hack
was a,
it in the Premier League. You know, how many times have we heard that before? You know.
oh, so many times. And I think as well during this period when, you know, it's sort of the cycle of SAF, isn't it? Where he starts to, you know, looks to, when he starts to lose that slight grip on a Premier League trophy, he goes for a bit of a reset, and you know he starts to bring in some more experimental signings and things like that, and some of them land perfectly, i.e., Wayne Rooney, Carlos Tevez, etc. And but also there's some, you know, notable misses as well, and I think Forlan was one of those where he just simply didn't adapt. However, like you say, he goes to Spain, and it's Villarreal who take a bit of a punt. Now, this is Villarreal at the time, who are emerging as somewhat of a force in Spanish football. They've obviously been around for a very, very long time, and we all know the story about them being from a town of 50,000 people, so we don't need to necessarily repeat that. But under Manuel Pellegrini, they start to challenge for Champions League positions, and you know they are, you know, consistently finishing in the top four spaces, qualifying for the Champions League, and they basically called upon Forlan as a bit of a punt, didn't they? Thinking, you know, he must be pretty decent. And I think there's a connection here between Forlan and Pellegrini, or certainly where Pellegrini was shopping previously, that put these two together, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd say it's fair to make the point that a bit of a punt was taken on him. You know, it wasn't many goals he scored for United. So Villarreal at the time, I mean, we've done the whole episode on the strike partnership at Villarreal, and we used the picture of Forlan as the cover, didn't we? Which was that probably like episode 4, I think, or something like that. I'd recommend anybody go back and listen. It was early days. We probably sound a lot younger on the recording now, but it's been a long 12 months. Yeah, it was a revival, wasn't it, under Pellegrini at Villarreal, and I think we get to the point where it's a goal in every 2 games, and this is me remembering my notes from when we recorded that episode a while back, and we talked about man management being a thing, and was Forlan the sort of person that needed a motivator, that he needed the arm around him. If you've come from, you know, a couple of years at United where you're getting heckled, but certainly as he was on his way out, and you're given the opportunity for a fresh start, and you feel supported, you're playing a team like Villarreal, who I think we covered this as well in that episode. At this particular period in Villarreal's history, it was an ambitious club that was kind of wanting to brazenly play a type of football that would, you know, it'd be not quite fearless, but you know, it'd have that tenacity to it, and allow in the final third a bit of expression, which I think is quite fair. I would say that's quite emblematic anyway of Uruguayan football. So maybe it's a natural fit, that sort of dynamic and intensity that they play with.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And, you know, I think one of the big things when you come from a club like Manchester United, who cover your ears, Paul, were the biggest club in the world really at the time, weren't they? And you go to Villarreal. We've mentioned this. We've mentioned this obviously small town that it is. It isn't quite the they're not the Europa League winners like they are now. Villarreal are an established elite side. This is them sort of like you say testing the water. So for him to come in and become a bit more of a bigger fish in a smaller pond, perhaps, is possibly one element for it. The other side of it, I think, is down to Diego Forlan's personal tenacity. I think he went to Villarreal with a point to prove to say, you know what, I know that I'm good enough to be playing European football. I know I'm good enough to be one of the top strikers on this continent. And again, he goes and proves that here because he has this career revival in La Liga. He wins the European Golden Boot in 2005. He strikes up an incredible partnership with Juan Roman Raquelme, who, to a lesser extent, is kind of having his own revival at Villarreal as well.
Mm.
So they're kind of doing it together, and they create this perfect balance of creator and finisher. And we spoke last week about Griezmann being this perfect foil for his many strike partners. Raquelme and Forlan just had that almost telepathic understanding of each other, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Joy to watch. And the highlight reels of them two playing together in the link-up play on YouTube, you're talking like a good 20 minutes worth of clips there from just, what was it? Was it like, 2004, 2007, so 3 seasons? I mean, like I said, I'm sure it was 54 goals and just over 100 appearances in La Liga that he got, that Forlan got during his spell at Villarreal, if memory is correct from when we recorded that episode. And I'd wager that, at least a third of them were linking up directly with Raquelme as part of the partnership or the link up that they had, the understanding that they had on the pitch.
Yeah, and that kind of, I suppose there was a spine to Villarreal as well, where Forlan fell very, very comfortably as part of it with Raquelme, with Marcus Senna as well in midfield,
Marcus Senna, yes,
and many others so there's Santi Cazorla as well, who was there just before he started, just before Forlan had arrived, but was certainly there as he was coming through the academies. So, he has this, brilliant time with Villarreal, reaches a Champions League semi-final with them as well. Obviously gets knocked out by, I think it was Arsenal in the end, who went on to the final in Paris against Barcelona famously. And basically, Villarreal have unlocked Diego Forlan. They've turned him into an elite striker. And with that kind of eliteness, if that's a word, becomes the attraction once again. And this is the bit I think where Forlan's got to be careful, because he's had his fingers burnt before. He's been to a top side and he's not really felt the benefit of it. So when he's looking for his next move, it is Atletico Madrid who come in for him and go, we need a replacement for Fernando Torres, basically. We're losing our wonder striker. We're losing our one of our own type players, who's now moving to Rafa Benitez's Liverpool. Who can we bring in? And Forlan just really fits the bill for him, don't they? Like you say, he's that kind of profile of a striker now that it softens the blow of losing a Torres by bringing a Forlan in. And once again, he really repaid them in kind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he comes in as you're right. It's like a Torres replacement, but he's a different type of player. I mean, think back to what a player and what type of player Fernando Torres was back then. And Forlan has a slightly different shape, but the one thing that's continued from his previous clubs was the tenacity that he has, the personal tenacity and the capacity to have that spark where it counts, and find the back of the net. And obviously we've definitely touched on this, but I don't think we've ever done we might not have done a direct episode on this. Maybe when we did a little bit with the Atleti episodes that we've covered in the past, but the partnership that he goes on to form, certainly with Sergio Aguero, during that time, they've got the fantastic UEFA Cup run is it Fulham that they beat 2-0 in the final? I think it was, or 3-0 in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
final.
yeah.
You know, and he's also he goes on to not just have a great run with Atleti, but it's where he starts, you know, delivering for Uruguay, and it's him and Suarez up front at the 2010 World Cup, where I don't know if I'm misremembering it, but back in 2010, I feel like Uruguay kind of were almost dark horses at one point with how far they went into the competition, and it was the performances of Forlan and Suarez together. I think Suarez
Mm,
obviously gets the headlines because of his other antics during that World Cup, like, you know, particularly the Ghana game with the handball and the way he celebrated them missing a penalty and everything. But Forlan was you know, he was the fulcrum in that side, and we were seeing probably him at the peak of his powers during that spell with Atleti and for Uruguay. Um, Quique Sanchez Flores is the manager at the time when they go on to have that run. So it's obviously it's pre Simeone, but there was already the making of Atleti, you know, being this. I think we've definitely spoke about this before on previous episodes, but this is like the noisy neighbours are really starting to get noisy in Madrid,
yeah.
it's at this time, you know, that, in my opinion, that it really ramps up. You don't have was it 3 years later, the 2014 silverware that Atleti get under Simeone. You don't have that without the Diego Forlan um, period of 2007 to 2011,
Mm,
where you know they get the European trophy, and they start really raising the profile of the club. I think with
mm,
Aguero leaving in the summer of 2011 and Forlan having formed such a powerful strike partnership with him, you know, they did put Atleti, or they dragged Atleti further up the standings and onto people's radars. And I'm saying that, you know, for people who were not previously fans of Spanish football, it was a time where, um, and you know, I'm just thinking about some of the lads I used to play five-a-side with at the time. Is like, you know, I was like, oh, have you, you know, have you watched Revista de la Liga? And they were like, no, I've just watched, like, you know, match of the day and that, and they were only into really English football. But then when Atleti started picking things up with Forlan up top and banging in the goals, I think it put Atleti on the map for a lot of people who were not necessarily in tune with what was happening in Spain.
absolutely, and I think the key difference when he goes to Atleti, and obviously, you know, his antics or his escapades with Uruguay at the World Cup, you can see Forlan as a mentor, which is a big
Yes.
part of it. Like I say, he becomes the teacher, which again is kind of its own resurrection in itself, because he was the young lad in European football who was caught like a cat in headlights, and now he's starting to help these other players who have come through, and he's helping to, you know, not only nurture them into a sense of, you know, I'll protect you, I'll put my arm around you type thing, but he's also saying this is how we've got to play here. Now, don't get me wrong, Sergio Aguero, sorry, has got, you know, uh, he's got a bit about him. He turned out all right, but certainly from a Luis Suarez perspective as well, you know, you look at how raw he was coming through at Ajax, and even in his early days at Liverpool as well. But you can see glimpses of Forlan in those two players, and those two players go on to have absolutely sensational careers at the very, very
Yeah.
top. And I think both of them will agree and say, yeah, Diego was a bit of part of that. And, you know, the fact he goes to, you know, the 2010 World Cup and becomes, you know, achieves immortality basically. And you've sort of notioned it as well, the fact that a lot of people probably hadn't seen this resurrection of Diego Forlan fully up close
Mm.
until they watched the 2010 World Cups. You know, you're talking about a 6 year gap there in
Yeah,
terms,
yeah.
you know, from when he left Manchester United to re-emerging on the world stage in South Africa, and he became the master of the Jubilani, which is no
Yeah.
easy feat. And he was just absolutely unstoppable and unforgettable, and that is kind of like the tone setter in terms of resurrections, because he does go on to play for, I think it's Inter Milan in Italy after that, before return to South America to see out his years, and now I think he's a ATP tennis player. So
Yeah,
now
he is.
he's
That's something that I picked up on. Yeah, he's well into his tennis now, isn't he?
he's like he's resurrecting a different career now, ever so slightly. But
Yeah.
fair play to him. But like you say, you look at this arc in Spain, and you're absolutely spot on. What he does to turn himself from essentially being on his knees, leaving Manchester United under a cloud, to being, you know, no one can ever take that, World Cup Golden Boot winner trophy off him. And like you say, he genuinely helped take Uruguay deep into that tournament, won European trophies with, Atletico Madrid at a time when they weren't winning trophies as often, some
Mm.
would argue, as they do now. So I think he's definitely someone who we can, give the title to as this resurrected in La Liga from that perspective.
Yeah,
On
definitely.
to our next person that I really want to talk to you about, Paul, because this is true back from the dead stuff, isn't it? In terms of a player who, basically was just sat at the top table forever, and then ultimately, like with a lot of players who spend their time, in and around an elite football club, becoming part of the furniture, you find yourself not being used as much as you should be. And then you become the norm. Then you get left out, and then it becomes a bit of a problem. But you don't want to leave because you're on too much money. And this was very much the case of Isco, wasn't it? When he
Hmm.
was at Real Madrid under Zidane, proper falling out of failure, um, you know, type territory. And it was hard to see how he could come back after he moved to Sevilla and basically spent 6 months there. Was on the front page of every newspaper pretty much every weekend saying, "What's happened to Isco? Why is Isco so bad at football now?" Being booed by the crowd at the Roman Sanchez Pizjuan, and ultimately being carted off to spend time out of football for 12 months after only 6 months in Seville. It was a
Mm.
dire story, wasn't it?
Oh, it absolutely was. Yeah, I mean, and we've covered Isco before, particularly when his time at Malaga, and he was, absolute gem, rising star. And well, when he went to Real Madrid, like let's be honest with you, even in the beginning when he was playing more regularly, it didn't feel like he ever really got going. But I was looking back at the stats before we started recording. He played over 350 games for Real Madrid.
Mm,
Um, notched up over 50 goals for him and 50 odd assists, but it still felt like he kind of just his career just fell off a cliff edge, really. What I can tell you, actually, I was the last game I was at before everything stopped for the pandemic was Real Madrid versus Manchester City in the Champions League at the Bernabeu. And Isco scored, and I was like, oh, I was really, like, obviously I wasn't, but he scored against the team that I support. But he was, I was kind of pleased for him in a way that he was still getting, because this was at a time where his career kind of looked like it was over, but he was in the team because of the amount of injuries that they had at that
mm.
point. And then he kind of just disappeared into it with regards to getting a look at Real Madrid. He ends up at Sevilla, very short spell there in 2022. And you think that's that's it, over, career over, really, when he leaves it. Does he leave in the January, or is it he
Yeah, so
joined in the January and left in the
no, so he signed in the summer, and obviously to
summer?
great sort of like aplomb as well, because
Yeah,
the thing is, I always look with
I
Isco,
remember the unveiling. I do
mm,
remember the unveiling, but come on.
it was the fact that you kind of hit the nail on the head. Really, you forget how long he was there for. To me,
Mm,
in my brain, I look at Isco leaving Malaga, and he's maybe in Real Madrid for, I don't know, 4 or 5 seasons. He's there for
yeah,
9 years. He's reaching testimonial territory. And
yeah.
like you say, when he leaves Real Madrid and decides to leave on a free, and basically it's right, who's going to sign Isco? I remember him being linked a lot to Liverpool and Manchester City at the time as
It
well.
it got to be the case of every summer. It was, particularly when Pellegrini was the manager, it was, our City are going to buy Isco. He wants a reunion with Pellegrini, and it
Mm,
was happening every transfer window, to the point where there must have been something in it, because you know for it to have gone on year after year after year, for a good 5 years straight. I think, like, even one of the aggregator accounts for City, I think it was probably that City Extra account, end up doing a bit of a joke thread on, like, how frequent it was. He was always
mm,
linked, But to think as well that he was there 9 years, like you say, he's only 33 years old now at the time of recording, which is frightening, really, if you think about it.
Yeah,
He seems to have been
crazy to
around
think
for a
of.
long, long time.
He is seen to be eternal, and like you say, he goes to Real Madrid because he is a star at Malaga. He wins, the Golden Boy Award. He's playing in Champions League football. He's demonstrated that he's definitely good enough to play at Real Madrid.
Yeah.
And like you say, he starts his career off right, and it just goes stale for him. And how many players can we, name on two hands that you go, oh, they moved to Real Madrid for big money. They started off well, but then they really tailed off. Whether it's Isco, Eden Hazard, Gareth Bale to maybe to a lesser extent, and it just seems to happen. So when he leaves Real Madrid, it's kind of like everyone's on the same opinion, right? Whoever gets Isco, they're going to get unlocked Isco, unchained Isco. He's going to change the game for them, and he's going to be this ultimate superstar. I never really put my finger on why it happened, but he completely flopped at Sevilla. It just didn't work for him. And again, this is a Sevilla squad at the time who, they aren't the ones we're looking at that staring relegation in the face. This was, Europa League winning Sevilla. This was Sevilla with, I think, Julian Lopetegui was the manager of the time.
Yep.
And I suppose maybe this is where it all starts to go wrong, because the failures of, Julian Lopetegui, the failures of Isco, the off the field antics that started to happen at Seville, maybe all started to affect each other. But ultimately, when it gets to January, no less than 6 months later, and he's being released, and then the added embarrassment of this failed move to Union Berlin as well, who had qualified for the Champions League or were in and around the top four of the Bundesliga. And basically they said, no, we don't want him. He's not fit enough. We can't have him in our squad. That total dejection, and then the next 12 months being without, I think it was even maybe just longer than 12 months, without having a club, was really, really like a stark drop off for Isco, who is, a generational talent in Spain, let's not forget.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He was genuinely the gem, the next big thing when he moved from Malaga to Real Madrid. The stock was never higher for him, and then it kind of never went. It could never go any lower than it did reach, really, I suppose. But he has a reunion, doesn't he, with Manuel Pellegrini, and it kind of it seemed like it was always destined to happen, that he's reinvigorated at Real Betis. I think it's fair to say that he refound the spark or whatever, the passion that he had for the game, because it also looked and looks like when he's playing under Pellegrini and playing for Betis that he's actually enjoying himself, which if you look back at some of those highlights, even when he was at Real Madrid, didn't always look particularly happy even when he was playing. But there's just something about it, and it's great to see. I mean, I think he still has his injury troubles, but he's a player who when he's fit and he's in form, I think he's a joy to watch.
Yeah, he gets protected by Pellegrini, doesn't he, to a certain extent, because he knows how to utilise him. And I think that's something that you can't do at other clubs who want to play in a certain way. Pellegrini knows how to unlock the best out of Isco. And the way he does that is by basically saying, here's your freedom to roam. Go and do what you do best, and I will trust, first of all, the rest of the team to work around you to an extent, but also for you to become the provider for the rest of the team. And, this is indicative of, Pellegrini's time at Real Betis, the way he's incrementally, season on season, improved them in certain areas. And Isco was a big cog for them. And let's not forget, this was, again, we talk about Pellegrini taking a punt on Forlan. This was a massive punt on Isco, who, let's not forget, 12 months earlier had signed for their big city rivals. They'd seen him be absolutely shit for Sevilla. So why would Real Betis want to have Isco? There was even, probably very jovial rumours that he might go to Malaga at the time when they were in the Primera Federación, and, which would have been a real, drop off from playing in the Champions League finals, etc.
Mm.
at that time. Wonderful story, and many Malaga fans would definitely loved it to happen. But when he signed for Real Betis, it was a bit more understandable. And he just transformed himself. And I think the epitome of this is you can see him, how many Player of the Month trophies he's won since he's got into Real Betis, how he's formed himself to be an essential cog in that team,
Hmm.
really rediscovered his form, and returned to the Spain national team as well under Luis de la
Yeah.
Fuente, which again is another, yard of how, back from the dead this career is.
Absolutely, absolutely. He's probably reminded a lot of people in the last 2 years or so that he's probably one of the most technically gifted midfielders of a generation to come from Spain. When he with the ball at his feet, there's not many who could match him for natural talent, if you
Mm,
call it natural talent. Um, so it's actually been an enjoyable story arc, really, I guess, to see. It kind of feels like a bit of redemption for him, the way things have come back around.
yeah, that's definitely the word I would use, redemption. Because what none of us wanted to see was Isco go down the way he was going down. To be
Yeah.
remembered as that failure, and then not to get a club, and then to be basically forced into early retirement. The fact
Yeah.
he got this second chance and he had it alongside someone who has genuinely said on several occasions how much he loves him. You know what I mean? That's
Mm.
that's the emotion that Manuel Pellegrini works with, and he trusts his player and he absolutely adores Isco, and he's got the best out of him. And I can see a world where Isco will probably retire at Real Betis. He's found a club that fits his groove. It suits him,
Yeah.
and he's just playing still to this day some of his best football. And Real Betis just keep on improving around him as well, which is always good to see. On to our next one then, Paul, because this one it happened a long time ago, but I think the the story of his legendary status that he now has is really good to remind ourselves of. And he is commonly referred to as Barry
Mm.
to his friends and people who know him. Um, but we know him as Iago Aspas, the Celta Vigo forward current, an absolute legend, all-time appearance holder for the club as well. It might even be the record goal scorer, I think. And it wasn't a great career start for him when he, first of all, left Celta Vigo to begin with, was it? When he again, moved to UK shores, like many of these stories seem to happen, he went to Liverpool and it just was not the right fit for him at all, was it?
No, that's right. And he goes at that time where it's Brendan Rodgers who's the Liverpool manager, and they seem to have, in that window ahead of the 2023, 2020, sorry, 20, God, that's how old it is, 2013, 2014 season, where, obviously Liverpool did come very close to winning the Premier League eventually. Steven Gerrard's infamous slip that caused them to miss out. But the start of that campaign, it felt like Liverpool under Brendan Rodgers were signing quite a lot of relatively young players.
Mm,
And in a way, Iago Aspas kind of just got lost in the noise of that particular season. If you think, oh, well, that's the way I kind of remember it a little bit. As I'm fairly certain that was also the same window they signed Javi Manquillo, the fullback, as well.
yeah,
Um,
and Danny Pacheco as well, if I remember rightly.
yeah, Danny
Um,
Pacheco, yeah. And
Louis,
was there
Louis,
another
Louis
as well?
Alberto, yeah,
Luis
Louis
Alberto, yeah.
Alberto.
Yeah, so it's yeah, it kind of like, I think like, it would have been fair to say kind of got lost in a noise with all of the other signings that were made, and that Liverpool team had a fairly sort of predetermined setup with Daniel Sturridge, Luis Suarez, Philippe Coutinho, was it Lucas Leiva in the midfield? I think
Yeah. Raheem Sterling as well was coming through at the
Sterling
time.
was emerging. Monty, yeah,
Yeah, you had SAS at Liverpool. It really became just a matter of limited opportunities for him. And
yeah,
again, I think the problem was is that when he did get his opportunity, he didn't have that consistency that he had at Celta, and he unfortunately made for want of a better word, some pretty embarrassing errors, which made, again, similar to Forlan, people go,
Yeah,
"Oh, he's not very good, is he?"
yeah, I guess so. And I think as well, like tactically, like it wasn't the right setup at Liverpool. I think for Celta, being being able to sort of lead the line and have the midfield come to him. I mean, he's another one. We've mentioned the word tenacity. I think that's a word that you could use for Aspas as well. So yeah, the Liverpool spell doesn't go great. He has a loan spell at Sevilla, which it's one season, isn't it? And I think if I'm
Mm.
right and remember it correctly, does he have a fair number of injury issues during that season as well? His appearances were quite limited.
Yeah,
Um,
again, this is sort of like a prime Sevilla, isn't it? Where they have got, some pretty decent strikers up there already. So he's going into a competitive environment, and he doesn't do too badly back in Spain. But essentially, he knows he wants to return to Spain full time. He
mhm.
gets that opportunity with Sevilla to go permanently, but pretty much as soon as he signs permanently with Sevilla, there's an offer in from Celta Vigo to bring him back home to Galicia. I
Yeah,
think about €6 million, if I remember right. So again, a bit of a bargain to come to think about it when you look back
yeah,
at it. And it's one of them where some players when they go to their home club, it means more to them, doesn't it? And I think that's definitely the way we can describe Iago Aspas. There would probably be plenty of times he could have left Celta Vigo to have another crack at another club, but he didn't want to.
yeah,
He'd seen the world to so to speak, and he goes back there and he's consistently their top goal scorer. And this is a Celta Vigo side that have both flirted with relegation, but also achieved the dream this year of playing in European football once again. And we've got Celta back on the scene, and he's been consistently a part of that throughout the last sort of decade, really, hasn't he?
absolutely. Yeah, he is Mr. Celta de Vigo, isn't he? At the moment, it's over 500 appearances he's made for that club, and over 200 goals. He's wearing the captain's armband. He's Galician. You're right in saying, ironically, this means more is a Liverpool FC tagline. I think that they used a few years back. But this for Iago Aspas, Celta Vigo, it does mean more to him, and you can see it. It's like I kind of in a weird way. It's probably not the best comparison, but do you know how when Hakim was at Betis that last
Mm.
time, and he has his moment with the Copa del Rey, and obviously he kind of he retires and goes off into the sunset. I kind of hope that Aspas gets the same sort of positive farewell when he eventually decides to leave Celta or to
Mm.
retire from football. But I hope that there's still a few years left yet before he does decide to hang up his boots. I think that when your phone pings and it's like 1-0 to Celta, and it's usually like an 80th minute 1-0, it's usually Aspas that's the goal scorer.
Oh, absolutely.
It
And
gives
like you
you
say,
whistle to whistle, gives you everything, doesn't he?
it's that extra 10% that you get out of him by putting on a Celta Vigo shirt. You know what I mean? And he'll always give you 100% anyway as a player. And I think settling back into La Liga, finding that that rhythm and a chance to make himself the main man again, more importantly, like he did
Mm,
in his first in the Celta Vigo, is quite important. But the way, again, similar to Forlan and to Isco as well, the way they've started to build the team around him and to suit him, they've got him strike partners that they really like. And also what I really really enjoy about Celta Vigo nowadays is that they've looked at good old Barry as a focal point, and they go,
mm,
well, if we've done it with him, why can't we do it with some others? And I think other than Athletic Club, who obviously use their own cantera, a lot more than most because of the Basque only policy. I think it's next is Celta Vigo, who have the most players making that leap between the filial to the first team.
Mm.
And I get the pleasure of watching Celta Porto every week with El Pozo, and
Mm.
you can see how much quality there is in there. How many basically mini Barry Aspases there are ready to go through and be part of that first team squad. And it's kind of like they're building the future in his image, if that makes sense. They're kind of saying, well, we know this works. Let's do it again. Let's do it 10 times.
Yeah.
It's influential, for him, and his legend status at the club will never, ever, ever be tested. We don't really get too many modern legends of clubs, don't we? But he's definitely going to have a statue outside, Barbados
Right.
in the future, isn't
Absolutely.
he?
Yeah, and you're right in saying, he would be, if I'm thinking of like, if I want to have an inspiration for the youth players coming through. He's the one to hold up there and say, look, this is what you can achieve. You can be hometown hero, or you can become a legend here at this club and achieve amazing things with it by playing football with passion.
Mm, no, absolutely. And I
Simple.
think, like you say, well, that's exactly it. We look to keep things, football simple, and I don't think there's anyone who's better at doing that job. Maybe Mikel Oyarzabal, or else Sociedad would be considered in the same kind of bracket. Just players who crack on with it, get on with the job, and are doing it for their hometown club. And he speaks exactly in the same kind of way, where he says, well, yeah, I could move to, I don't know, an Everton or a Stuttgart or Marseille or something like that. But
Oh,
I
he's.
don't.
I'd have him in a Champions League team, Nick. He's good enough to play for City, United, Liverpool. Oh, sorry, I mentioned United there. They're not in Champions League. Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea.
Yeah, but they seem to find the joy in just I'm doing it. I'm doing it for me. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
I'm bringing my team onto the world stage. I'm doing it for them and representing
yeah.
them. And I think he will always look to put that icon status that he has at Celta Vigo first and foremost. Especially going forward. And one
Mm,
day you could definitely see him either going upstairs or onto the touchline. His association with Celta Vigo isn't going to go anywhere. Let's put it that way.
yeah. Yeah.
But again, a true turnaround from where he was at his low ebb at Liverpool, and then he's managed to again get himself back into the Spain team, making one of the most prominent strikers in the La Liga and a club legend to boot. It's the trifecta met there,
Yeah.
isn't it?
He's a La Liga legend for sure.
Absolutely. And speaking of La Liga legends, this one's a bit of a different one to me, and I think this one might be a bit of a conscientious one between us both, Paul, because he's kind of my suggestion, and that is Fernando Morientes. And the reason why I wanted to include him in here is because I think he's one of those players who has fought back a few times from not necessarily low positions, but being discarded is probably the way I'd be
Mm,
describing it. Now, we did an El Partido story on Fernando Morientes a couple of months ago, and sort of spoke about this idea of the forgotten number nine, and that was more of a nod to how Fernando Morientes played football. But
mm,
within that, there was a narrative where Morientes was sort of like, despite being a top player and despite being a consistent performer, was always the first name that would fall off the team sheet, if that makes sense. Like he was sacrificable, and that was very prevalent at Real Madrid first and foremost. When obviously he signed for Real Zaragoza, he's made a brilliant strike partnership with Raúl, and then all of a sudden the Florentino Perez era comes in, and he decides that I want Galacticos, and I will pick Galacticos, and I'll pick players who I think have not just got a skill set on the pitch, but marketability off it. And he
yeah.
looked at Fernando Morientes and went, "You don't have that. You don't have that marketability off the pitch. Therefore, you are not really worthwhile for me." And that's the decision that was basically saw Fernando Morientes phased out for R9 Ronaldo. It saw Raul move out to the left hand side as well to to accommodate these Galacticos, and it's a bit where he goes to Monaco where I see this as kind of like the first resurrection. So he goes to play football in France. He goes on loan to Monaco.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes an instant hit at the I think it's the Stade de Louis II. Um, Scoring goals for fun, doing everything that he did at Real Madrid, but doing it in Monaco and making himself that focal point. Bringing players in with his his takedown play, his the way he directs the ball from his headers and such like that. Nothing changed in Fernando Morientes' style, but his surroundings did, and it just elevated him once again. And that was sort of really highlighted when he played against Real Madrid in the Champions League quarterfinals. It was,
Yeah,
and he scored against them both at home and away, if I remember rightly. Like the
yeah, not
silence that must have been at the Santiago Bernabeu when he scored
yeah.
against them must
It's
have been
his goals that
deafening.
knocked them out, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
And that, I mean, it must be nice. It must be nice to have a moment like that, where you've. I mean, I'm not saying it because it's Real Madrid, because we on this show we love all Spanish clubs equally.
mm.
Yeah, I'd say it's fair. No, but we've got nothing. We're not anti any club. I don't
Yeah.
mean it in an example of it must have been good to score against Real Madrid. It must have been good to score against any club that is deemed you surplus to requirements, and
Mm.
to do it on a big stage and to do it home and away, in a competition that they deem to be their own competition. Really,
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
moment must have if you could bottle it, that'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? But yeah, I think that's and it's kind of like, if we're talking about arcs and resurrections, Orientes' story is a bit of a double dip, isn't it? Because from Monaco, he goes to Liverpool, so it's kind of,
Well,
go on.
there's this bit where he kind of suffers from this double rejection, if that's the thing. So he goes back to Real Madrid,
Mm,
knowing that he's finished as first of all as a Champions League finalist, of which Real Madrid were not. He's finished as the Champions League top goal scorer, which Ronaldo wasn't. He
mm,
goes back to Real Madrid thinking, I've got maybe a chance to maybe prove myself now. I've kind of gone and performed, and am I Galactico? Because a lot of us knew who Fernando Morientes was. I thought he certainly had some kind of marketability. He gets to January after he returns to Real Madrid, and it's we still don't want you. You're not doing it for us. You're not sexy enough, basically. And that's when he goes to Liverpool and signs for Rafa Benitez during this Spanish Revolution. And I remember the hype around this. I remember them going, Liverpool are signing Fernando Morientes. What a great signing that is. This is, to go with all the other Spanish players they bought. How good is this? And I think the bit that got me when he first moved there was that he was cup tie for the Champions League. So you didn't get to see him in his best environment on those European nights. And when you did get to see him play in the Premier League, it was like he was just maybe a little bit too slow for what was happening around him. He
yeah,
found it difficult to assimilate to the Premier League, didn't he?
yeah, absolutely, and that happens to plenty of players. It's a different style, it's a different physicality, it's a different pace. It's a different culture, which it's not always agreeable with everyone. And that's not to say that it's unique to the Premier League, that particular problem, because you see it with players that go from the Premier League to Germany, or go from Germany to Italy, or Italy to Spain. A different league, a different culture, a different style of play, new surroundings. There's no guarantee that it all works, and works first time for everyone. But yeah, there was something about his time at Liverpool where it felt like the game was happening around him at times rather than he was a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely sort of like what the reality was for him. He could never really fully replicate, that form. And obviously Liverpool went on to win a Champions League, and you
Mm,
know the players that were sort of getting ahead of him were the likes of Milan Baros, who was a very good player, but he was not. You wouldn't put him in the same category as a Fernando Morientes, for example. So ultimately, when he goes back to Spain in 2006 and goes, right, again, I've got something to prove here. I'm not redundant. I'm not past it. He goes back to Spain and plays for Valencia, which I think is just such a perfect club for Fernando Morientes. It's kind of that
mm,
good mixture of being a humble club, but also a big enough club to to have kind of like its own Galactico kind of like aura about it. And he
Yeah.
joins this team that has got that sort of like building up in space. They've had the successful years, ironically, with Rafa Benitez. They're now going through that sort of like second stage or second wind of having their own superstar team with the likes of David Silva, Vicente, Joaquin, Juan Mata. They've got Danny Parejo coming through. They've got David Villa up top with Morientes, and he settles in really, really, really well. And he really discovers his form once again playing for Valencia, and has an absolutely brilliant time. And I suppose the reward for all of that is he wins a Copa del Rey, which he's not won a trophy for since the 2001 Champions League final. So he's had a bit of a barren spell. But winning this and how proud and how happy he was when he won it was a real reminder of his quality back in Spain, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the that spell there is one of the reasons why he's remembered really as being the the quintessential number 9 for Spanish football in a way by some people. And I know we've said this many times, but we definitely need to do an episode covering that Valencia team from say 2008 to 2011. I'd probably say that. I mean, we put it off because our first ever episode was all about Valencia and Rafa's revolution. We thought we can't do too many Valencia episodes all in one go. Maybe enough time's passed now.
Yeah.
Just the names of those players you were mentioning there that he had his teammates just mouth-watering, really, aren't they? But no, it was a good art for him. A bit of redemption again is probably the word we're going to use. And it was pleased for him that he could round things off at Valencia back in Spanish football with a Copa del Rey, which I've not got a Copa del Rey, and I'd very much like a Copa del Rey winners medal. I think my time might have passed now,
nice.
though. Yeah,
never say never, Paul. Never say never. But like you say, it gave him a chance to go out on a high, didn't it? And I think this is what when we've looked at some of these careers where people have gone, to Liverpool, ironically, or the northwest of England, and done badly, they've managed to come out on an upward curve, and that's exactly where Fernando Morientes, did go out on with Valencia. He did have another spell with Marseille just after that, but he was kind of like, do you know that weird last 12 months of a player's career where he kind of goes, I'm just going to go there for a bit. And that's what it felt like with Marseille. I think he only made something like 15 appearances or something mad like that for the French side, and then he just retired. So, his pomp ended at Valencia in my book. And like you say, it was good to see him come back from, like you say, those double rejections, but one quite personal in terms of you're not a Galactico. It'd be like someone telling me saying you're not funny. And I would crumble because people do tell me that. And also, simply not being good enough to play in the Premier League, which I think must have been hard for him to take as, a top European striker in the Champions League. So, he is definitely a good choice for that. Our last one, Paul. Our last one's a bit special, isn't it, this one? Because this isn't a resurrection in the senses we've been talking about a player falling out of form. If anything, this player has played immaculate football his entire career. Wherever he's gone, he's been the best player on the pitch in most cases, whether that was in his early years at Villarreal, whether it was on loan at Recreativo de Huelva, whether it was being part of the starring Malaga side of the Champions League, in the Premier League with Arsenal. I'm sure you've already knowing who I'm talking about. Of course, we are talking about Santi Cazorla to end this podcast on. And when we talk about him coming back from the dead, we could literally been talking about, him pretty much almost dying or as good as Paul, really, aren't we? The way he came back was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, what a story, really. And it's probably one that everybody already knows, but it's a special one, and that's why we want to end on it. And you're right in saying wherever he's gone, he was one of the best players on the pitch. I'd say with the exception of whenever he played on the team opposite David Silva, because I still think David Silva's the greatest Spanish footballer ever. But
I think Santi Cazorla is better. I'm just throwing it out there. I
well, we're
like
not going to
Santi
fall
Cazorla
out, are
more.
we?
At the very end, not on Jesus's resurrection day. No, they
No,
won't.
that wouldn't be very Christian, would it? So,
It wouldn't. It
uh,
wouldn't.
and plus, Matt's not here, but I know that Matt would side with me in picking David Silva over Cazorla. But this is all about Santi Cazorla and what a fantastic footballer he is and his story. So you're right. The absolutely devastating injury that he had whilst he was still at Arsenal. Multiple surgeries on that ankle, severe infection, which it destroyed the tissue around his ankle, didn't it? He obviously, there's the pictures that he had a skin graft, which was off his forearm, wasn't it? So part of his tattoo is now on his ankle, and
he nearly lost that foot, didn't he? If I remember rightly,
yeah.
amputate, which to think from a football player, it's like, please don't. That's my job.
Yeah,
I need that.
And being told repeatedly by doctors, you might struggle to ever walk normally again, let alone play football. It was very much as well. It was as close to being career over as career over can be, really. With the severity of it.
I think doctor actually told him you will never play football ever again. And I think that's part of the in some of the interviews I've read with him, obviously in hindsight, whether he used that as motivation to get back on the pitch, only he will ever know. But the fact he was told by not one but multiple quacks that you can't play football again. If you do, you'll snap your leg. Because you've had this major surgery, you've had this issue, you've had your arms grafted onto the back of your ankle, and it's not worth what might happen to you. Now, long-term effects, no one will ever know, but the way he comes back into football after missing a massive, I think it was something like 630 odd days, which to me and you, just shy of 2 years. If I hadn't been at work for 2 years, I'd forget everything about my job. Never mind come back to play elite football. And, and the way he did it was just incredible. And I'm not just talking about the unveiling he had at Villarreal as well, because that was resurrection. If there was a cave nowadays in the modern era, you would be reappearing in a transparent tube filled with yellow smoke. That's sort of like the biblical comparison, I reckon.
Yeah, it's been a good few years, but that unveiling is still one of the best that we've ever seen, I think. But you're right. It's a case that what that return at Villarreal also represented was the fact that he was able to prove that he could still run a game, and be this incredibly talented player that just it never leaves you, really. I suppose the magical touch, the vision, the passing. And let's not be about the bush. It's not like he was still young at this point either. He was well. I mean, he was our age, wasn't he? So he was still young. Very very young. But it's difficult to come back from something like that. I'd say it's probably one of the greatest comeback stories as well, because of we've had his spell just playing top level football for Villarreal in that return. But then what happens next and where he is now makes it even more special, doesn't it? Because it's a story of I guess loyalty to your boyhood club, admiration for the game of football, pure passion to go back to. I mean, obviously, there's the spell in the Middle East in between, isn't there? But to go on and make those appearances for Real Oviedo and help them come back from, the second tier back to the Primera, and he played a part in that playoff run of games as well, didn't he? And he's made appearances, albeit limited, but he has made appearances this season. And unfortunately, for them, it looks like Oviedo are going to probably be returning to the Segunda after just one season in the top flight, but just to have got back to the top flight and to have Cazorla part of it, it's something that even in years from now, everybody will talk about it as kind of like not quite a fairy tale, but like, a legendary story.
Oh, absolutely. Like you say, it capitalizes not just the resurrection of Santi Cazorla, but the resurrection of Real Oviedo, where they'd been from the brink of a club that was going to disappear. They had literally days to raise funds in order to pay the debtors to keep the club running. They went down to the fourth tier of Spanish football, which is very much into the regional elements of playing teams from in and around Asturias to ascend for a club of this stature was insane. And he always made sure to keep an eye on that from afar. He was heavily involved in some of the fundraising to keep Real Oviedo alive in 2012. And I think he always had this promise from, even when he was a young kid to say, I will end my career here. And, the fact he's gone back there and there's these daft rules in Spain where you can't move to another club and get paid half of what you got paid at your previous club. So you kind of had to step out to go to Qatar for a little while in order to realign his wage structure back in Spain. I think there's 2 seasons that you have to be out of the country for it to reset. And he goes to Real Oviedo, and this is one of the most beautiful stories you'll hear. He doesn't want a wage, but nobody's allowed to work for free in Spanish football. So he gets paid a wage, the minimum that Real Oviedo has to pay him, a week. And he then donates that money himself to the Real Oviedo Foundation and the Youth Academy and things like that. So effectively he is paying for free because he's giving the money back to good causes. And the fact he does that and he lifts them, out of the Spanish Segunda in that dramatic playoff final against Mirandés, he's, now playing in La Liga at the top table again of Spanish football. I think he's just turned 40 years older. If he hasn't, he's very close to doing so.
Yeah,
it's just an incredible story, isn't it? From a player who was told that he was never going to play football again to being the star of your hometown team as they return to La Liga. It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing.
Oh, it is. I know some of those photos as well of near enough 12 months ago now, where the Oviedo fans are celebrating their promotion, and he's right in there with the fans, isn't he? And I think there's so many pictures in there that really will be iconic and legendary at that club for all time now, because of what he means and what his story is. And it's just, he comes across as a really genuinely likable person as well, which is is always a bonus, really, isn't it? And it's just what what we want to see. It's a nice story, I think, to round off this episode with.
Yeah, build the statue. That's what they're going to have to do there. I think if any player does deserve a statue, it is outside the ground. It will be Santi Cazorla outside the Carlos Tartiere as well, which I imagine that Dr. Sidlow is already getting arranged within the corridors of Oviedo's planning council, whatever it might be called. But yeah, a brilliant story and a great way to end this Resurrections podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this as much as we've enjoyed reminiscing on the careers of these 5 fantastic football players who turned things around in Spain. If you're liking what you hear here on El Partido, don't forget as well that we have a secondary podcast, as to explain, called La Grada El Partido. It is on Patreon and Substack. You can catch all new episodes on there every Friday, early and ad-free, plus plenty of bonus content as well, such as El Partido stories, Super Sebasta quiz shows, Q&As, Revista El Partidos, you name it, we've got it, all for a lovely just £2 a month, Paul. Less than a cup of tea nowadays in most cases.
Yes, it is.
So it's definitely worth it. Definitely worth going checking that out and subscribing from there as well. And we may even do some giveaways for members on there as well. You might win yourself like a book or a cup or maybe even a football shirt. Who knows? So the temptation must be there for you to go and enjoy another fun, basically, which is all good on there. But for now, I'll say thank you to you, Paul, once again for joining me to talk about all things Spanish football nostalgia.
Cheers, Nick. It's been a pleasure as always.
No problem. And thank you to you guys at home as well. Your support is always appreciated, but we'll catch you next time here at El Partido. Hasta luego.